The door creaked open and my heart stopped. There he was, my brother, frozen in the doorway, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. I wanted to speak, to explain, but what could I say? He had caught us, and the weight of his stare felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. In that moment, everything I thought I could hide came crashing down. We were the kind of family people admired. Or so it seemed. Growing up, my brother and I shared an unbreakable bond. He was my rock, the one I could always count on. People often said we were closer than most siblings, almost inseparable. But as life moved on, things changed. My relationship with my partner felt perfect, at least on the surface. We had a good life, steady, predictable. Weekends were filled with laughter, movie nights, and shared dreams of the future. But deep down, there was this nagging emptiness, a void I couldn't explain, even to myself. I told myself it was just life, that everyone felt this way sometimes. And then there was him, always there, always supportive. My brother had a way of making people feel seen, understood. We had a shared history no one else could touch, an intimacy born from years of shared secrets and late-night talks. He wasn't just family, he was my best friend. I didn't realize when things began to shift. Maybe it was the way he'd linger during conversations, or the quiet moments where his gaze felt heavier than it should. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. He was my brother, after all. But those moments started to pile up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something unspoken hung between us. The day he smiled at me in that way, like he could see right through me, everything inside me paused. For a fleeting moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in so long. It scared me. It was wrong. Yet, it also felt so achingly right. Life at home became more suffocating. My partner, as caring as they were, didn't seem to notice the storm brewing inside me. Nights felt longer, and my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. The bond with my brother, once innocent and comforting, had started to feel dangerous, like a live wire ready to spark. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were always there. The ones I ignored, the ones that eventually pulled me into this mess. I wish I had seen them earlier, but by the time I did, it was already too late. It started with little things, small moments that I could have ignored if I tried hard enough. My brother's gaze would linger a bit too long, his voice softer when he spoke to me, as if every word carried more weight than it should. It felt like he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, something my partner had long stopped noticing. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and I couldn't unsee it once I noticed. At home, things weren't the same. My partner seemed distracted, distant. Or maybe I was the one who had drifted. I told myself it was work stress, routine dulling the spark. We all go through it, right? But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I started to avoid their touch, their questions, their presence, convincing myself that it was just a phase. I wanted to believe that everything was fine. But it wasn't. Meanwhile, my brother was always there. A text when I needed someone to talk to. A knowing look when I felt like the world was crumbling around me. We'd always been close, but now it felt different, dangerously so. Every interaction felt charged, like there was something unspoken between us that neither of us dared to acknowledge. It was intoxicating, confusing, and terrifying all at once. Then there were the late nights. Nights when I'd lie awake next to my partner, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I'd replay moments with my brother over and over, analyzing every word, every glance. Was it all in my head? Was I reading too much into this? Or was there really something there, something I couldn't ignore anymore? One night, I caught myself scrolling through my phone, staring at his name in my messages. I wanted to text him, to tell him about the void I felt, the confusion that was eating away at me. But what would I even say? How do you tell your brother that you feel something you shouldn't? The thought made me sick, but it also filled me with a strange sense of longing. And then my partner started noticing. "You've been quiet lately," they said one evening, their eyes filled with concern. "Is something wrong?" I forced a smile, told them I was just tired, but I knew they didn't believe me. I could feel their gaze on me, the weight of their suspicions growing heavier with every passing day. I started pulling away, creating distance between us. My partner tried harder, date nights, small surprises, even late-night talks like we used to have. But instead of pulling me back in, it only pushed me further away. It felt like they were clinging to a version of me that no longer existed. The guilt was unbearable, but the pull toward my brother was stronger. Every time we were alone, the tension was palpable. It was in the way his hand would brush against mine accidentally, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it all. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him, not directly, but in a roundabout way. Do you ever feel like things aren't the way they should be? I asked, my voice shaking. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to decide how honest he could be. Yeah, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I feel it too. That admission changed everything. It was the moment the cracks turned into chasms, and there was no going back. From that point on, every glance, every word, every touch felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. And I had no idea how to stop it. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping progression, a buildup of moments that on their own might have seemed innocent. But together, they formed a picture I couldn't deny. The tension between us was no longer something I could brush off. It followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of the lines I was getting dangerously close to crossing. The night it all changed is one I'll never forget. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. My partner was sound asleep beside me, their steady breathing a painful reminder of the life I was about to unravel. I tried to push it all down, to convince myself that it was just a passing phase, a fleeting infatuation that would eventually fade. But I knew I was lying to myself. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and drove. I wasn't sure where I was going until I found myself standing outside his apartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I knocked on the door, my breath catching in my throat when he opened it. He looked surprised to see me, but he didn't ask why I was there. He didn't have to. The answer hung heavy in the air between us. Couldn't sleep, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded and stepped aside to let me in. The silence was deafening as I sat down, the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I told myself it was just a conversation, that there was nothing wrong with seeking comfort from someone I trusted. But deep down I knew better. We talked at first about nothing really. Small talk to fill the space, to distract ourselves from the tension that was quickly becoming unbearable. But as the minutes passed, the distance between us seemed to shrink. I don't even remember how it happened. One moment, we were sitting across from each other, and the next, I was close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft but laced with concern. I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. If I did, I knew I'd lose whatever grip I had left on my self-control. I don't know, I whispered. Everything feels so wrong. He reached out then, his hand brushing against mine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like a lightning bolt had struck me. My heart raced, my breath catching as I looked up and met his gaze. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I could see the conflict in his expression, the same war I was fighting inside myself. This is dangerous, I said, my voice trembling. We shouldn't. But I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't want to. I know, he said, his voice barely audible. But it's hard to ignore, isn't it? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He felt it too. This unexplainable, undeniable pull that had been building between us for weeks. I wanted to deny it, to push him away and run back to the safety of the life I'd built. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped by the intensity of the moment. And then it happened. His hand brushed my cheek, a touch so gentle it made my heart ache. We can't, I whispered, though my body betrayed me as I leaned into his touch. We can't do this. I know, he said again, his voice heavy with regret. But tell me you don't feel it. Tell me this isn't real. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I deny what was so painfully obvious? The air between us crackled with tension, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like a storm about to break. Just as I felt myself leaning closer, the sound of the door creaking open shattered the moment. I froze, my heart dropping to the pit of my stomach as I turned to see my brother standing in the doorway. His face was a mixture of shock and betrayal, his eyes wide as he took in the scene before him. What's going on here? He asked, his voice low and trembling. The hurt in his eyes was almost unbearable, and I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The weight of what had just happened, or almost happened, was too much to bear. In that moment, I realized there was no going back. The line had been crossed, and everything was about to come crashing down around me. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with tension and the crushing weight of my brother's stare. His expression was a mix of disbelief, anger, and pain, emotions I couldn't bear to see but couldn't look away from. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to say anything that might soften the blow, but no words came out. How could I explain this? How could I justify something so unforgivable? What's going on here? He asked again, his voice firmer this time. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation, a demand for the truth I wasn't ready to give. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling at my sides. It's not what it looks like, I managed to say, my voice barely audible. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. Because it was exactly what it looked like. There was no way to spin this, no excuse I could offer that would make it better. His eyes darted between us, taking in every detail. The way we were sitting too close, the look of guilt on my face, the tension in the air that practically screamed what had just happened. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he spat, his voice breaking. I know what I saw. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was written all over my face, in every awkward movement, every shaky breath. My brother wasn't just my sibling, he was my confidant, my protector. And now, I had betrayed him in a way that felt irreparable. "How could you?" he asked, his voice trembling. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the tears he was desperately trying to hold back. "How could you do this? To me? To him? To yourself?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't even look at him. My mind raced, searching for something to say, but there was nothing. The silence stretched between us, suffocating and unrelenting. My brother turned to him, the man who had been my accomplice in this moment of weakness. "And you," he said, his voice sharp as a knife. "What the hell were you thinking? She's your sister. Did you think this was okay?" He didn't respond right away. His face was pale, his eyes filled with regret, but he didn't try to defend himself. "It wasn't planned," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "We didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for this to happen?" my brother repeated, his voice rising. "That's your excuse? You didn't mean for this to happen? What the hell does that even mean?" I flinched at the anger in his voice, at the raw emotions spilling out of him like a dam had broken. He had always been the strong one, the calm one, the one who held everything together. But now he was unraveling, and I was the reason why. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling empty as they left my lips. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You're sorry? That's all you have to say?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, echoing the words that had already fallen flat. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Well, congratulations," he said bitterly. "You've managed to hurt everyone." The silence that followed was deafening. My brother stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and fury. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the room, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I sank into the couch, my hands covering my face as I sobbed uncontrollably. The weight of what had just happened was too much to bear. I had destroyed everything. My relationship with my brother, the trust we'd built over a lifetime, the fragile balance of my life. And for what? A moment of weakness? A fleeting feeling I couldn't control? "He'll never forgive me," I said, my voice muffled by my hands. "I've ruined everything." He sat beside me, his hand hesitantly resting on my shoulder. "It's not just about him," he said quietly. "It's about you. You have to figure out what you want, who you want to be." I looked up at him, my eyes red and swollen. "I don't know how to fix this," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by being honest," he said. "With him, with yourself, with everyone. It's the only way." I nodded, though the thought of facing my brother again felt impossible. How could I look him in the eye after what he'd seen? How could I ask for his forgiveness when I didn't even deserve it? The hours that followed were a blur. I replayed the moment he walked in over and over in my head, the look on his face seared into my memory. I thought about calling him, about begging him to let me explain, but I knew it was too soon. He needed time, and I needed to figure out how to make things right, if that was even possible. By the time I left the apartment, the sun was starting to rise. The world outside felt foreign, like I had stepped into a place I no longer belonged. Everything felt different now, tainted, broken. And I had no one to blame but myself. When I got home, my partner was waiting for me, their expression filled with concern. "Where were you?" they asked, their voice soft but firm. I was worried. I froze, the weight of their question pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I wanted to lie, to tell them I had just gone for a drive, but I couldn't. The guilt was too much. I knew that if I had any hope of salvaging what was left of my life, I had to tell the truth. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. There's something I need to tell you. As the words left my mouth, I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. This was it, the moment everything came crashing down. There was no turning back now. The truth was out, and the fallout was just beginning. The silence in the room was unbearable. My partner sat across from me, their hands clenched tightly in their lap, their expression unreadable. I had just told them everything. The moments I tried to ignore, the feelings I couldn't control, and the moment my brother walked in and saw the truth. My voice had trembled as I spoke, the weight of my confession almost too much to bear. Now I sat there, waiting for their reaction, bracing myself for the inevitable fallout. They stared at me for what felt like an eternity, their eyes searching mine for answers I couldn't give. "I don't even know where to start," they finally said, their voice shaky but calm. "How could you let it get this far?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, my voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Then why did you?" they asked, their voice rising slightly. "Why didn't you stop it before it got to this point?" I didn't have an answer. How could I explain the pull I felt, the way my brother had become my anchor in a world that suddenly felt so empty? How could I make them understand something I barely understood myself? "I don't know," I whispered. "I wish I did." They shook their head, their face pale with disbelief. "You don't know," they repeated, their voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "You don't know why you betrayed me? Why you destroyed everything we've built together?" The word betrayed hit me like a slap in the face. That's what I had done, hadn't I? I had betrayed them, my brother, and myself. There was no escaping that truth, no way to undo the damage I had caused. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how much I regret this." They stood up suddenly, pacing the room as they ran their hands through their hair. "You regret it?" they said, their voice trembling. "What does that even mean? Do you regret what you did, or do you regret getting caught?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. I wanted to say that I regretted all of it, that I wished I could go back and erase every moment that led me to this point. But the truth was more complicated than that. I regretted the pain I had caused, the trust one had broken, but a part of me couldn't regret the feelings that had brought me here. And that realization made me feel sick. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to answer that." They stopped pacing, their hands falling to their sides as they turned to face me. "I can't do this right now," they said, their voice filled with exhaustion. "I need time to process this. I need space." I nodded, my throat tight as I fought back tears. "I understand," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Take all the time you need." They didn't respond. Instead, they grabbed their keys and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my choices. The sound of the door closing behind them echoed in my ears, a painful reminder of the distance I had created between us. For hours, I sat there in silence, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I thought about my partner, about my brother, about the life I had destroyed in a single moment of weakness. I thought about the look on my brother's face when he walked in, the pain in my partner's eyes as I confessed the truth. And I thought about myself, about the person I had become, and the choices that had led me here. The next day, I tried to reach out to my brother. I texted him, called him, even drove to his apartment, but he wouldn't answer. He needed space too, and I couldn't blame him. I had shattered the bond we shared, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Days turned into weeks, and the silence was deafening. My partner stayed with a friend, their absence a constant reminder of the emptiness I felt inside. My brother avoided me, and I avoided everyone else, too ashamed to face the world. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my guilt and regret. When my partner finally agreed to meet, their expression was guarded, their tone distant. "I've been thinking," they said, their voice steady but cold. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "Not yet. Maybe not ever." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I understand," I said, my voice trembling. I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes." They sighed, their eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know if you can make this right," they said. "But if you're serious about fixing this, you need to start with yourself. You need to figure out why this happened in the first place." Their words stayed with me long after they left. They were right. I couldn't fix what I had broken until I faced the truth about myself, the emptiness I had been running from, the choices I had made, and the person I had become. It was a painful realization, but it was the first step toward healing, no matter how long it would take. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Could you forgive someone after a betrayal like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking and thought-provoking stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.